Here we go. We've got adjusted EPS for the fourth quarter coming in at $1.62. That is a beat. The expectation was for $1.52. Revenue coming in at $68.1 billion for the quarter. Expectations were looking for $65.9. That would also be a beat then. Adjusted gross margins coming in at 75.2% for the quarter. Data center revenue, very important number here, $62.3 billion, coming in better than expectations, looking for $60.36. Gaming revenue coming in at $3.7 billion. That is a miss. We were looking for $4 billion there. As far as looking at their first quarter outlook here, they are saying computing demand is growing exponentially. Putting out they're putting out some of their revenue numbers as well for the current quarter, so let's go to those too. Compute revenue, $51.33 billion, just slightly below the $51.61 the street was looking for. Networking revenue, $10.98 billion. The street was looking for $9.02, so that is a beat. But management saying, of course, Jensen Huang speaking, computing demand growing exponentially here as we take a look at how we are moving on Nvidia right now. We are seeing a nice move to the upside of about 2%, so not a hugely significant move, but they are putting out some guidance as well. First quarter revenue expected between $76.44 billion and $79.56, so pretty wide range there, but well above the consensus looking for $72.78 billion. Jensen Huang going on to say enterprise adoption of agents is skyrocketing. Customers are racing to invest in AI compute. And again, their guide does not assume any China data center compute revenue. So, George, as we just are getting these numbers coming across, you've barely had a moment to even look at them. We are seeing this move to the upside here, but, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, look at the reaction right now. We're talking about $4.50, let's call it $5. Like I said, because it's tough to move such a large stock in the after hours. So I do appreciate the fact that they're providing conservative guidance, excluding sales out of China. So that essentially, I suggest, is a good thing. It gives you an idea that there's still, they don't have visibility in terms of policy in China. But again, if they do provide some updates, and this could be certainly some updates that don't necessarily come based on an earnings event, it could be, a mid-quarter update. That is, I think, a positive catalyst. In fact, again, when you assume your sales in China are not going to be there and you provide guidance that they're not going to be there, anything is better than nothing. And I think that's good. The good way they're approaching some of the uncertainty around that region of the world.
Yeah, and Sam, taking a look at some of the commentary from Jensen Huang, because you had said, the narrative might be just as important here in our conversation with Rolf. He's saying computing demand growing exponentially. The agentic AI inflection point has arrived. Grace Blackwell with NVLink is the king of inference today, delivering an order of magnitude lower cost per token, and Vera Rubin will extend the leadership even further. Enterprise adoption is skyrocketing. Our customers racing to invest in AI compute. The factories powering the AI industrial revolution and their future growth. Their record quarter numbers, record full year numbers again. So just another record breaking quarter here. We are seeing a move to the upside, but as George mentioned, a little muted, which might be to be expected until we get on the call. But Sam, as far as the call, what are you anticipating being some of the questions here as we've gotten a look at these numbers and some of the initial commentary from Jensen Huang?
Well, you can't knock much about this report, as you say, beats across the board pretty much. And these are all the sorts of words that you want to hear from Jensen Huang. But no doubt, it's not just about the numbers. As I mentioned, as I've been hearing today, it's really about the narrative that stacks up. The market really wants to see how confident Jensen Huang is around this market share right now and how comfortable he is with the way things are going, as we were discussing with Rolf, who doesn't seem to think it's so much of a threat at the moment, what other companies are doing, like AMD, but also with respect to the TPUs, which is the sort of a more recent story we've been covering. But we want to hear about more color regarding some of that demand, regarding obviously some of the capex, and also maybe if he is asked about China, just as far as if they have any idea on that timeline. Because as George pointed out there, this would be very much the icing on the cake here if they're factoring all of this in, and we're seeing this reaction in the stock today, ex-China. This could still offer some incremental upside here. I mean, you're talking up to shipments of 400,000 H200 GPUs to this market as far as what the analysts have been crunching, and that could represent $11 to $12 billion in incremental revenue this year. So let's wait and see. I mean, will management wait to, as I said, GTC to update formally on this? That's the big question. Maybe they just have no update from the Beijing side on this as well. So maybe they're just dealing with a lack of visibility, but no doubt that would provide some incremental upside here. But all in all, I think it's a good report, and I think we're just looking for a little bit more color and confidence coming from Jensen Huang on the call, not to mention some of the risks that he has flagged, because obviously we've been hearing a lot about the memory prices, how much this has been a bit of the Achilles heel very much in some of these reports, how much they're thinking about that, particularly with the HBM4s, as Rolf was touching on, with your SK Hynixes, your Samsungs out in Korea, and Microns as well. Just any update on that, and also just if he has any thoughts on the power needed for all of this AI as well. I know that he has talked about energy being a constraint here too.
Yes, and we are getting a little bit more color just as I'm sort of pouring through this report. So I want to walk through a couple of these things with both of you here. Hyperscalers coming in at just over 50% of the data center revenue for this quarter. Also getting some detail from the company that the data center revenue up nearly 13 times since the emergence of ChatGPT. That is a milestone metric that they're using in terms of measuring. Now, Sam, you mentioned some of the supply constraints as a potential concern. They're also commenting on that, saying that they do see supply constraints for gaming in the first quarter and even potentially beyond the first quarter. So they are commenting even in advance of the call on that. George, what are some of your thoughts on this initial commentary we're getting that they're trying to get ahead of before the call?
Well, so, I listen to keywords. So I hear keywords like Rubin, I hear keywords token and inference. And as I explained prior to the release on earnings, what's happening is the Rubin platform is a dedicated platform to make this transition slowly from GPU LLMs, training models and training chips, which they still lead in, into a smoother, more stable growth in inference. That's where the market is moving. That's why there's tremendous demand for HBM memory. And that's essentially Nvidia's strategy, is to essentially offset the training demand for GPUs into inference, which is going to be widespread and continue to grow. That's essentially the hits, or the tokens, if you will, the queries that are input by users and given outputs across the board through, again, your own PC or even in the edge cloud. So you got to keep in mind that gross margins, which I believe came in slightly less than 76%, are very high because of the existing Blackwell chip technology. But once they go into selling more Rubin chipsets, the composition of that chipset, I think it's a 6-interface chipset, I could be wrong, the gross margins will eventually fall once again. So again, I do think that there is another growth movement in Nvidia's business, but I'm just going to let the price tell me when it happens. I'm just going to say, well, look at the price this last year. I think it's around 210, 211. If we get a couple consecutive closes above that level, then that's the next phase of a continuation in the stock.
And George, you are right. Yeah, margins coming in at 75.2%, guiding for the current quarter to be between 74.5 to 75.5%. So kind of in that same range. Could be just a slight deceleration there on this Rubin ramp up. But before we have to say goodbye, any final thoughts on these numbers that we got, or the reaction that we might see tomorrow in the markets?
Was that to me or to Sam?
Yes, to you.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't make decisions right now, to be honest with you. There's a lot of information, a lot of moving parts with this company. So keep in mind that tomorrow's open and tomorrow's close, I suggest, is more important than the open, because there are many times in the past where Nvidia has either gapped higher early on the day and sold off. So you got to be mindful of that. But use your positioning and risk tolerance well. Keep in mind, look at the daily chart. That's why I'm looking at around the 210, 211 area. If we close above that, this may be the next leg higher. But until that occurs, you got to keep in mind we're still in this trading range, which is about 6 months in the making.
Yeah, right now at 202.90 after hours with this 3 3/4% move to the upside. But George, thanks for being with us to break down these earnings that came out late, but still doing very well. George Tsilis,